Hello, and welcome to the SaWGuy podcast.
Like scary movies. What's your favorite scary movie?
Here's Johnny.
We'll tear your soul apart.
The boogeyman is real, and you found him.
Game over, man. Game over.
What do you want?
I want to hear you scream. From the front time, bitch!
Welcome to the SaWGuy podcast. As always, I'm the SaWGuy, bringing you guys over here episode 6. And it's a special episode because it's two-part. Not one, but two. And, oh man, it's a damn good topic I'm going to talk about. But I always have good topics, like I say in all my episodes. But anyways, I gave it out to you in the slasher one. And I basically said who had the top kills. It wasn't Michael Myers. It wasn't my favorite Jigsaw. And it wasn't Freddy Krueger. It wasn't Leatherface. It was Jason fucking Voorhees. That's right. Mr. Friday the 13th himself. Woo! Man. So I had to go and talk about it. I mean, you can't talk slasher films unless you're going to talk about the guy who owns the most kills, right? He has at least, shit, in the 150 range is what they guesstimate, you know, if you include all the films plus the reboot. But I had to go ahead and bring him up because, you know, he's the king of slashers, right? So anyways, this episode's going to be about Jason Voorhees. It's not going to talk about the Friday the 13th series because it took a shit on Jason and it did its own thing like Twilight Zone. That's probably a later episode down the road. But this first part of the episode, I'm going to talk about films 1 through 5. I might talk a little bit about 6, but this is part 1. There's so many damn films in the Jason series, the Friday the 13th series. I got to do a 2-part. And excuse me if I'm a little under the weather still, you know, but I'm coming back. You can't kill the SaWGuy. I'm still here. So anyways, let's get down right to it. So when we talk about Friday the 13th, I always fucking laugh at this because if you ever seen Scream, Ghostface, he basically asked Drew Barrymore a question, and it was the question, I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, who was the original killer in Friday the 13th? And she screamed it on the phone, Jason Voorhees! Jason Voorhees! Right? And we all know it wasn't Jason Voorhees, right? So let's get down to it. The first movie, Friday the 13th, right? That was meant to be a one-and-done horror film. But for that, it was so damn good for what it was in the time when it came out. Because it came out in 1980. And at the time, you had slasher films. Of course, you had fucking Halloween. You had Texas Chainsaw. But they were never about the gore. They were never about the blood and guts and the gory, all that shit, you know? But Friday the 13th, the first one, really changed it. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I'm going to give you spoilers, you know? So if you haven't seen it, you got to go see it. Well, anyways, the first one is about his mother, Pamela Voorhees. She goes crazy because her kid is drowning inside the lake. And basically all the camp counselors at the time, they're having sex. They're not paying attention. You know, it was the 80s, whatever, you know? So basically the whole first movie goes that she goes crazy. And they're trying to figure out, okay, who's killing all these counselors? You know, who is it? Who's the serial killer? And then the twist at the end was that it was Jason's mom. And at the time when the movie came out, it was kind of like what Saw did in the 2000s. You didn't know who the fuck the killer was. I mean, you kind of guessed, and then you kind of pieced it up, and then it comes down to it, it ends up being Jason's mom. The whole story goes where, you know, the last victim basically cuts her head off and everything, and then she jumps in the boat, goes out there in the middle of the lake, and this little crazy looking boy comes out and pulls her out of the boat. Well, then it flashes into another scene where she's in the hospital and she says, no, there's a boy in there. There's a boy in there, right? That boy ended up being Jason Voorhees. And because the first Friday the 13th was so damn good and so damn well received, obviously, you know, they had to go and make money off of it, right? So, in comes part 2. And the creator of Friday the 13th, Sean S. Cunningham, I think, from what I read and researched in some of his, you know, interviews and things like that, articles, he basically wanted to do a one-and-done film. He wasn't too particular on sequels. But, you know, okay, you can kind of make a sequel out of it, do something good with it, and see where it branches off. And see, this is the reason why I like Friday the 13th series. You know, besides being myself, born on a Friday the 13th, I like the series because every one of those films is done differently. Obviously, I know they had Sean S. Cunningham had his hands all over on it, but every director brought its own different take, which is really cool about the series. But anyways, so you go through the whole first film. It's basically meant to slash and gash, and it becomes success. So we start part 2. Part 2 gives you a twist and says, okay, well, Jason was never dead, and he basically comes back to life or whatever, or he never died. And when he comes back, he goes after and kills the one survivor from the first film and starts part 2. Now, what a lot of people, normal horror fans, not crazy ones like me and some of you out there that really love this shit, but some of you out there think that Jason has always had the hockey mask. He didn't have the hockey mask. He didn't get that until part 3. I'm going to get to that in a bit. But anyways, in the second one, he starts doing the same thing as his mom, going around slashing and gashing and killing all the victims, killing all the counselors. These counselors, they keep going to the same fucking spot. You would think that people die and they wouldn't go back to the same spot, but they kept going to the same fucking spot. Who figures, right? So anyways, they go in, and basically Jason, he's not a kid no more. He's basically like an adolescent, for around 18, 19, around that age. And he just has this mindset on killing people because of the fact that he sees the original camp counselor kill his mom. And he doesn't really understand it. And you don't find out how Jason is as far as like his character until later on in the series. I mean, you obviously see his face is a little deformed and stuff like that, I mean, it's missing some chromosomes. But anyways, you find out in the series, he's not all there, And so later on, he kills off different counselors one by one, here and there, until it comes down to the last victim. And basically, she mind fucks him because he basically, from the first film, he collects her severed head, builds this huge shrine, I'll see if I could post a picture of it or something. But some of you may know what I'm talking about, So he builds a shrine of his mom, and it has her severed head, like right on top, on this little, it looked like a fucking table, like something, a little shrine. But anyways, the last victim, she basically puts on her sweater that she was killed in and plays off that she's Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mom, and says, Jason, you're a good boy, don't do this. And, one thing leads to another, Jason gets killed, right? Or we think, right? But that one was so damn well received because it was a sequel to it. They, where I'm going with this, they had to go and make a part 3, right? So this is probably 1980s. Well, 1980 for sure for the first one. 1981, early 82 is when part 2 came out. 83 is when part 3 had came out, because each year they started, making different ones. But anyways, when they were making them, they decided in part 3 that he was going to come back, and he was going to come back with no mask, right? So part 3, what I also love about that one, because it's so gritty and different, but that's when it started having a little bit of comedic into it. The Friday the 13th series, it built like this whole slasher genre. You can't have a slasher film without, this stupid kid, the jock, the virgin, this, that. I mean, it started a whole craze on it, and that was basically how, Friday the 13th built all that series. But anyways, back to part 3. Part 3 kind of skewed off a little bit to the story, They still had camp counselors going in to the same area, but it wasn't, they were camp counselors. They were just a bunch of kids going to a cabin in the same lake, right? So anyways, they change up the story. You have the fat, goofy kid. You have the boyfriend and girlfriends. You have the potheads and shit like that, And they basically build that story up where, Jason, he's more normal at this time. He's more a little bit older. I wouldn't say so much normal, but he was more out there a little bit. He was dressed like in a work shirt and shit like that. And the second one, they had him dressed in overalls. They made him look like your typical generic slasher killer. But when they went to part 3, they gave him the whole work clothes kind of deal. And it looked a lot more creepier, and they did a good job with it, especially in the makeup department. Because with the original Friday the 13th, I think it was the first one. I don't know if it was the second one, but I know for sure it was the third and fourth. I believe Tom Savini had worked on it. If you don't know who Tom Savini is, look him up. Great makeup effect artist. He also acted in some of his movies, done his own thing, and he directed the remake of Night of the Living Dead in the 90s, but more on that later. Anyways, so we go back to part 3. Anyways, so Jason, he basically takes them out one by one because these kids, they go into old cabin that this chick used to have. She used to live there. And the best part about this series, this is the first time they busted out the 3D. And 3D at the time was your typical, it was your typical red and blue lens, and the shit will come at you at the screen, you know, like that. And they did okay for some of the scenes, you know, especially some of the death scenes. I mean, it was corny now if you look at it, but if you watched it back in the day, you know, during my time, that shit was good, you know, and creepy. But anyways, in part 3, I think part 3 really stuck it out a lot more because of the fact that in part 3, Jason didn't have the mask, but he was still taking them out one by one. You know, there was a biker gang that got involved because they were fucking with some of the kids and they fucked with them back, things like that. And then little by little, he was taking them out. Well, anyways, the whole story goes how Jason gets his mask is because the fat goofy kid, he was a jokester. So he brought all these props with him. He tried to make this girl that he was trying to hook up with, you know, like him because he's funny and all this and all that. But anyways, he had a hockey mask. And it was a, what was it? Jersey, God, I can't remember the fucking name of it. I don't follow hockey, you know. But anyways, it was a hockey mask, and I think it was the Jersey Devil hockey mask. Because it was a basic hockey mask with the red stripes, you know, the 3 red stripes. And in the scene, well, after he took out, you know, a few of the kids, he basically sees this kid. He's just done having sex. His girlfriend's in the shower. And he sees him crawling around in his hands. It was the thing this character did. You know, he was... I don't know, part 3 was really weird for me, acting-wise, but I loved the story and how they built it up and built Jason as this badass motherfucker. Because that's the one that really put him on the map, I think, because it got his mask, you know? But anyways, when they did that, it shows that he puts on the mask, and then the first victim he kills is that he's, you know, doing a handstand, walking around. Jason just cuts that motherfucker right in half. But anyways... yeah, I get all excited about it because, you know, part 3 was always one of my favorites out of the whole series. But anyways, after he gets his mask, then that's when he goes on the killing rampage and everything. And then it shows towards the end, he gets the axe to the head. And once he gets the axe to the head, he falls down. Boom, that's the end of part 3. And you think it's over, right? Well, then, here comes part 4, right? So with part 4, they call this one Friday the 13th, the final chapter. And what's funny about it, I'll post it. Maybe I posted it, maybe I haven't, but there's a picture where it shows the hockey mask on the blood with the knife through the eye. Obviously, it hints what happens later on in the series where he gets a machete through his eye. And then this is where they build Corey Feldman's character. But anyways, you see in part 3 at the end, he gets the axe to the head. And it's supposed to be on his left side. But on the poster, they fucked up and did it on the right side, but the knife through his left eye. Go figure. I mean, you'll see some pictures where they have it off, you know. I think some people have tried to digitally fix it. But anyways, part 4 was supposed to be the end of the series. They were supposed to kill it off because at this point, it grew into something so big. And at the same time as Jason was going on, part 4, you already had Nightmare on Elm Street coming out. And then I think they already started the second sequel, I believe, you know, or a couple of the sequels into it. This is around 1985, 86. Because when part 4 came out, it was already, you know, a big thing. But anyways, part 4 was another good favorite of mine because it picks up right into the story where the police, the paramedics, and everybody, they think he's dead. They pick him up. He goes to the morgue. You think he's dead, but then he gets up and then he has one of those bone saws and shit and cuts up all the doctors and everything. Then he goes back to Crystal Lake. It would have been cool if they showed him on his path back, but, you know, movie magic, right? But anyways, part 4 also had some other actors, because, you know, in the first one you had Kevin Bacon, who basically got his start in, you know, Hollywood because of that first Friday the 13th film. Part 4 you had Crispin Glover, and he's the one who played Marty McFly and Back to the Future and everything, but he always played those weird, off-centered characters. But anyways, part 4, they introduced a little bit more comedic into it, but it wasn't comedy, it was dark humor. You know, it was him. I laugh because this fucking scene always gets me. It was Crispin Glover's character and this other guy named Teddy. That was a character's name. They're sitting there talking about how Crispin Glover broke up with his ex-girlfriend and shit like that. Then Teddy, you know, classic 80s. Oh, let's type it in the computer. Oh, computer says you're a dead fuck, you know. And then that kind of really started the humorous part of slasher films, and the whole Friday the 13th series changed all that genre. It was genre bending. That's what's cool about it. But anyways, you have part 4. It goes on. Jason comes back. He kills all these people. Well, I guess I can't remember. There was a guy chasing after Jason, but in that scene, when he was looking for Jason, they said, they were very brief on it. They said it was one of his family members from either the first, second, or third one that he was coming back to try to look for, and he couldn't find him and shit. And so they basically tied that whole story in where this other guy's the outsider. But then they also tied in Corey Feldman's character, and his name was Tommy Jarvis, and his mom and his sister were living with him. She was a single mom. But anyways, you have all these 3 parts going on at once. And so basically you start seeing the kids are getting killed little by little. Everyone's starting to worry. The mom, Corey Feldman's mom, goes out. She gets killed. And then basically it comes down to where Jason, he finds Corey Feldman's character, and it goes from there where Corey Feldman, he finds out that Jason was missing a chromosome or 2 and figured out how he looked. So he figured, okay, to mess with him, he was going to shave his head, try to look exactly like him, kind of mess with him. But anyways, that guy who was looking for him, he ends up killing him. And a lot of people talk shit about the scene because when Jason's killing him, the guy's screaming, "Oh, he's killing me! Oh!" It's classic 80s cheese, whatever you got to do. But anyways, so Jason finally gets killed by Corey Feldman because Jason sees Corey Feldman, and out of the blue, Corey Feldman just goes crazy and just starts chopping him up. Die! Die! So he basically kills off Jason in part 4. So Jason's completely fucking dead, right? That's where the whole thing where he's missing the eye, they got the slash on the mask and everything. So the series, to me, the original series was part 1 through 4. That all tied in. Now part 5, they brought it back. Part 5 was considered a new beginning. It was meant to be a one and done because a lot of people didn't like it when it came out in theaters. A lot of people were fucking pissed. But the story that centered around part 5, I liked because it was different. All the different Friday the 13th films, they all could have had a different mask killer, and you wouldn't even know the difference because they were that far different. But they still tied into that same story about how Jason went from here to here to here to here, how Jason developed, who the fuck was Jason, things like that. But anyways, so we go into part 5 now. Part 5 basically still follows Tommy Jarvis. As he was a kid, he's older. He's about 19 to 21. He's not all there. They send him to, not a mental institution, but like a rehabilitation center. So that way he can kind of, work on himself and things like that. Well, anyways, over there, he's working with a bunch of people. And, shit goes down. Somebody gets killed there. And, spoiler alert, it ends up being a paramedic who basically put his kid there, but didn't claim that was his kid. It was a weird, muddy situation. The movie didn't really explain too much into it, other than the fact that it was his kid at the institution, and basically he was all pissed off that his kid got killed. So and this was all happening in Camp Crystal Lake. I don't think they called it Camp Blood yet. But anyways, when all that went down, he got pissed and he snapped. And so he figured, okay, well, I'm going to start following the Jason storyline. So this guy out of the blue would put on this big burly ass suit, would wear a hockey mask, and you knew it wasn't Jason because it was a Jason mask, but it had the blue stripes. A lot of people call it the Roy mask because that was the name of the paramedic, was Roy. So the whole story goes is that Jason is supposedly back killing people, and it's messing with Tommy Jarvis. And he had, some good name actors. He had Louis McGill and a few other people in there. But anyways, the whole story goes that little by little people are getting killed off. You have a crazy neighbor, and then she eventually gets killed off. And then Tommy Jarvis, he's confronted with this imposter Jason, and he gets hurt, but then he goes after him, and then eventually they kill him, and they kill him for good, because then you find out, oh, it's not Jason, because once, I guess, they were fighting in a barn or something, and then he kicks him off the top of the barn, he lands like on all these spikes for like a farming machine, and then the mask comes off, and then you see that it was Roy, the paramedic, the whole time, which I thought part 5 was good on its own as a standalone film, but to continue it from the first bit of the series to the last bit, now that it's been like, 30 years since that film's made. A lot of people started to like it because it was different. It was a one and done film. I mean, you see a lot of films right now, a lot of horror movies that do that shit, where it's like, okay, you think it's this killer, but it's this killer, you know? And that's how they've been doing it to make their money off of it. But anyways, I thought it was interesting how they did, you know, the first 4, then part 5, the way they did part 5. And in the second part of the episode that I'm doing, I'm going to go through 6 all the way up to the reboot. Now, I don't want to get in too much into that because part 6 through 8 was its own. And part 9 was Jason Goes to Hell. That was a one and done. Jason X was another one and done. And then, obviously, Freddy vs. Jason. That was kind of a one and done / sequel to the Final Friday. And then the reboot. But anyways, my whole point on doing this episode is because the Friday the 13th series changed the whole slasher genre. Because it got so fucking big and just well known, you know. I mean, you can go to any Halloween store. You can go to any costume shop. You see a hockey mask, you know right off the bat, that's fucking Jason Voorhees. Everybody knows that, right? But it's one of those things where I like the series. Now, I don't know how people feel about it, how they understand it, or what they do. Everybody's their own, you know, person. But for me, I've always liked it because the kills are over the top. You know, you have like kills where he picks people up, smashes them, their eyes pop out. He was a badass, and he was quick. You know, quicker than Michael Myers. He would gash you with a fucking machete, which was just fucking brutal for its time, you know. And then, it basically made the rules of horror films, you know. Don't ever have sex in the room alone because Jason will come out and kill you. And 9 times out of 10, he did, you know. And there was a lot of... Like I said, every single movie was its own standalone film. If you take Jason out and put a different serial killer, it could be something else. But it was cool how they did the story. And a lot of it pushed the boundaries because, you know, there was horror films back in the day. There were slasher films, but they hardly showed any blood. You look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It pushed the envelope for that movie because when the sequel came out, there was a fuckload of blood in part 2, the one with Dennis Hopper. Nightmare on Elm Street, when it came out around the same time as the first Friday the 13th film, so they had to push the boundary a little bit because they heard the buzz about it. Now, when you talk about Michael Myers and the Halloween series, they had to push the boundary a little bit with that too. So, I mean, the first one and the second one, there was at least a good 3-4 year gap. So when the second one came out, it basically, they showed a little bit more blood, just not a whole lot, you know. It was John Carpenter style. But later on in the series, you know, through Halloween 4, 5, and 6, they showed a lot more, you know, just to compete with Jason. And Jason, as crazy as it is, most people don't think that he carries the high kill count. Everyone thinks it's Michael Myers. Now everyone thinks it's Jigsaw because now they have 8 films of it. And I was surprised too. I looked at it. I know he was in the top 3, but I didn't know he had 150. But 150 kills is not bad. Really isn't that bad. That's why I was like, oh shit, okay, well, I gotta do this on Friday the 13th, you know? Gotta do this episode. But anyways, the whole series of Jason Voorhees is that he's the icon. If you had to pick the top 3 out of all of them, I mean, you're obviously gonna have to put Jason in either 1, 2, or 3. It's Jason, Freddy, Michael, or Jason, Freddy, Leatherface. But Jason's always in there. You know, everybody knows Jason. But what I like about the whole series is just... they kind of, when they were filming it, they basically just did whatever they could to make the film great. And there's been a lot of documentaries out for it. I don't know if you've seen like Memories at Camp Crystal Lake or His Name is Jason. There's different documentaries, and they're like, seriously, they're like 4 or 5 hours long. But they go through the whole series of like 1 through Freddy vs. Jason, because that's when the reboot was coming out, so they didn't have the documentary on it. But anyways, when they did it, they like tell you all the secrets. How they had issues with some of the blood coming out, how they had issues with some of the scenes, and how they were pushing the envelope, but then they would get an NC-17 or rated X, then they had to go back and cut it. But it's one of those films that has become a staple for horror films. It really has. So whenever you think of slashers, like I had talked about in my previous episode, you can't talk about slashers without talking about Jason Voorhees, Freddy, Jason, or I said Jason twice. What the fuck? I meant Michael Myers. Or you can even go as far as say you can include Pinhead and a few other guys, because, you know, once they built that character and everything like that, then they have their own kill count and all that stuff. But anyways, I'm like with Jason, he's always been just this badass motherfucker. Way better. Like, I'm not gonna get into debate and say who's better or whatever, because I know we're all horror fans. We all love him just the same, right? But if I had to go and do a count on it, I would have to say Jason would be up there as my top slasher guy, because there's just nothing else like it. I mean, he's so fucking big in pop culture. They did a Super Bowl commercial with him in the fucking Radio Shack one. And then you go even as far as, say, like in video games. He's got his own fucking video game. He had two of them. He had one for the NES, which a lot of people say that one sucked because he didn't do anything really. He was just a big fucking monster and you couldn't kill. And then they have another one out right now where you could play as him, and it's a multiplayer game trying to run from him. But then also too, they included him in what was that other game? Terradrome. It was like an online game that they did. And then they also finally included him in Mortal Kombat. And just the way that they did it was just so fucking badass. I mean, they kept true to his roots and everything with that. But Jason, he's become a popular horror icon, a legend status, and it's pretty cool how they just keep it going, you know? But anyways, thank you for joining me for part 1 of this special 2-part episode on the Friday the 13th films. I know I was kind of brief on everything, but, you know, I got to save the good stuff for part 2. I really do. Because part 2 is where it gets interesting, you know? That's where the whole storyline skews off. That's where Jason kind of changes from a normal human being to like a demon and shit like that. But, you know, you got to tune in on part 2 on this episode just to make sure, you know, just to catch everything. So thank you for tuning in. I'll catch you all guys on the next episode on part 2. All right.